So I was the one that found you. So, and then now I watched, I think, a lot of things that you've done. So has Adam. And it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So we're dying to hear more. Addie, you want to say hello?
Hey there, it's a pleasure to meet you, and I think your work has only gotten more interesting as the times have even grown more conducive to the kind of mind control that you've written and talked about. So we like to say we are futurists, and you were an inadvertent futurist, I think, in finding this area that's become even more seminal and important to society. So congratulations on your work.
Yes, well, thanks. I was sucked into Moonies, Queens College in 1974.
Being absconded into a cult would do it, right?
Right.
Yeah, I was a creative writing major, so it was a total life-changing event. And I knew it was like very important, and the CIA tried to recruit me 3 times, and I just didn't want to. I said, if you need me on a specific case, I would be willing to consult, but I don't want to be secretive. And
You know, the last 3 people we've talked to, the CIA has tried to recruit. It's interesting. So your story is fascinating, Steve. And, you know, we're wondering if you could share with our listeners how you got involved with this moon cult, how you got into this idea of it, because we're very interested in paranoia. As a matter of fact, the next newsletter we're working on is about paranoia. So what drew you literally in?
I was an extra honors student, skipped 8th grade. I was a creative writing major, and my story is that, like most people, I wouldn't even ever think that I could get recruited into a cult, much less be taken over by a cult. My situational vulnerability was my girlfriend abruptly dropped me, and I was sitting in the cafeteria at Queens College, and 3 women flirted with me and asked to sit at my table, and they said they were students, which they weren't. And they said they were part of a student movement, which they weren't. I asked if they were part of a religious group, not at all. And within a few weeks, I am learning that the group thinks that the Armageddon is going to happen and that the Messiah is coming on Earth. They didn't say who they thought he was at that time. And I got swept up into an authoritarian right-wing fascist cult for 2.5 years.
Well, wait, did they indicate to you that they would have sex with you if you followed them?
They were. I became a recruiter, so I know exactly about how it's done. You want the person to feel like they're attracted and you're attracted to them. And I thought, as a 19-year-old horny, young man in college, I'd get lucky with one of them because they were all really cute. And again, I was not looking to drop out of college, quit my job, donate my bank account, and follow a fascist. I was interested in a girlfriend and sex.
How long did that journey take? And along the way, were there moments when you doubted it, or were you convinced the whole time that you were doing the right thing step by step?
Good question. So most destructive cults use deception, which is either outright lying, withholding vital information, or distorting it. And for me, back in the 70s, there was no AI, there was no data privacy collection, which is how cults are recruiting now. Back then, they were very good at asking questions and eliciting from me which buttons to push. They found that I was Jewish, so they didn't try to talk to me about Jesus and the religious piece at all. They talked to me about pollution and corruption and starving children around the world and wanting to do a good thing. So that was the appeal. It lasted 2.5 years. I would say I stopped any conscious doubting within 3 months. And part of my indoctrination, and I know you're doing this thing on paranoia,
Yeah, I'll
a
send it to you.
pivotal moment in my recruitment and indoctrination was being taken to see the Exorcist movie in Greenwich Village with 100 other Moonies, and then vanned up to Tarrytown, the headquarters, where Moon personally said, God made the Exorcist. This movie is a prophecy of what will happen to you if you leave the Unification Church. And it was at that moment, I was so scared by the movie. At that moment, I was convinced that any doubt was evil spirits trying to invade me. And I had to cling to the Messiah and do thought stopping. And I was so afraid of my own thoughts.
I've heard you talk about thought stopping. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure. It's a behavior modification technique, and I have an influence continuum from ethical influence to unethical influence. And the reason I'm explaining this now is that therapists can teach thought stopping to clients in an ethical way if they're depressed,
Anxious.
but there's no reason to be depressed. A therapist might say, you're making yourself depressed with these recursive negative thoughts. I'm stupid, I'm lonely, no one loves me. Stop the negative thought and let's replace it with I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm attractive. And what we've learned about psychology and the human mind is that if you tell yourself a message, it can reorient your behavior and your emotional state. That's an ethical use of thought stopping where you know it. It was taught to me in the Moonies as a way of disconnecting me from my critical thinking and from reality testing. So, for example, quick story, my father read in the newspaper that the Moonies had a gun factory in Korea, a rifle factory. So he called me up and he thought he was going to get me out of the Moonies by this data. So he said, do you know the Moonies have a gun factory in South Korea? And I immediately did thought stopping as I had been trained to do. I started chanting in my mind, crush Satan, glory to heaven, peace on earth, glory to heaven, peace on earth, true parents. Moon and his wife were considered sinless Messiah figures. So my father's intention was to get me out of the group, to make me question, but he was propelling me deeper in because then I didn't trust him. He was Satan attacking.
That's the confirmation bias in action.
Yeah.
Except what people need to understand about this mind control cults is it's really a dissociative disorder. It's even in the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic Statistical Manual, several versions, explicitly as a disruption of identity. And they explicitly talk about brainwashing, thought reform, coercive persuasion, and cults. So think about Steve Hassan from Flushing, Queens, who liked to write poetry and liked girls, and then Steve Hassan, son of Sun Myung Moon and Hak Jahan, the true parents of the universe, that was dependent and obedient on them. These were my satanic physical parents. So my new identity was trained to suppress my real identity. And I was trained to obey. So in the years since my rescue from the cult, as I watched the planes go into the World Trade Center, my thought was, I would have done that. If I had been ordered to fly a plane into the World Trade Center, or when I saw the bodies in Jonestown, I was like, I would have done that. Right. Because I was not allowed to think any negative thoughts. I was so afraid.
Are you hypervigilant now about anybody trying to over-influence or gaslight you because you're so attuned to that previous history?
I don't walk around paranoid, but I have a lot of people who don't like me and say very nasty things about me. And so the old saying about, just because you're fearful doesn't mean they're not
Or
out to
paranoid
get you.
doesn't mean they're not out to
Yeah,
get you.
exactly. So I do have hypervigilance, and I do look for patterns and anything out of the ordinary. My unconscious goes on alert, and I'm looking for data to reality test. But it's very important. I have a whole chapter and a 3-step intervention in my book, Freedom of Mind, on phobias and how it's necessary to teach people to distinguish between a legitimate fear where there's actual danger and an irrational fear. And it's actually one of the fastest mental disorders to help people be cured of.
How do you get people off their phobias? Like they're afraid of dogs or afraid of going broke or...
So as a therapist, again, it's about psychoeducation largely, explaining to people we need to use our frontal cortex to discern, is there danger? Is there an actual risk of danger? And what happens if you have a fear, an irrational fear? There's a triggered event that happens where you say, oh my goodness, it's a dog. You visualize the dog attacking you, or maybe you had a bad experience with a dog or watched a frightening movie or something. Your heart rate goes up, and you have an entire fight and flight response, and it shuts down your critical faculties, and people typically just want to avoid the stimuli. And I teach people, listen, it's your mind, you should control it. So if it's a picture of a dog, there's no danger you're going to be bitten and get rabies. And so teaching people to visualize being with a dog, licking them, a puppy, changing your internal dialogue, saying, oh, it's a cute little doggy and how lovely it is, and regulate your breathing. And the last piece is called systematic desensitization, where you're doing exposure therapy little by little so that you can recalibrate your automatic response. Where I go further with cults is then once I explain how to cure that, and I often talk about elevator phobias, I talk about how other groups, not yours, but other groups can put phobias to control you, and show the person, oh, this is a man-made mind control technique.
Synthetic, yeah.
Right in back of you, it says the cult of Trump. The cult as Trump, or
the cult of Trump? Yeah, Simon and Schuster.
Okay. So tell me, wait. So set the stage. What is it about the environment now, culturally or psychically or environmentally or whatever, that is conducive to a Donald Trump?
So when I was asked by my agent to do this book, I first said no, because I've not been a political person, but I know from being a New Yorker that he was a malignant narcissist and a womanizer. And
first, define for the audience a malignant narcissist, because I have a feeling I know many of them. But go ahead.
So it's a term that Eric Fromm.
And is it catching?
Well, there is a contagion effect especially when you have someone in an authority role. Unconsciously, people want to conform and follow a leader they believe is legitimate in their mind. So yes,
that's why they wear the red hat.
That's part of it. But when I first did the book, I knew he was a malignant narcissist. So not just the normal narcissism, the grandiosity, the need for attention, entitlement, lack of empathy, but it's the pathological pieces of thinking they're above the law, pathological lying, sadistic, paranoid, violent, inability to trust, threatening. So you get the whole. So I said, okay, well, that fits the stereotypical profile of every cult leader. I can write the book comparing him to my former cult leader, Hubbard of Scientology, Jim Jones, and 100 other cult leaders that I've studied. But as I started researching the book, I realized this is a culmination of decades of development of social psychology and neuroscience aimed at persuasion, at cultifying people. And what speeded everything up is the internet and social media and collecting people's privacy data. And so my book has a thesis that the cult of Trump is comprised of authoritarian cults, primarily. And for example, there's a group called New Apostolic Reformation, which unfortunately the media has mischaracterized them as Christians or evangelical Christians. These are people who claim to be a prophet or an apostle of God, who speak to God directly, and they do the controlling behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to make people dependent and obedient in a mirror of the Moonies. And it's these people who say God said Trump will win the 2020 election. And it's the followers are following their prophet, not following Trump. And the minute the prophet gets a revelation to follow someone else, they're going to follow someone else. That said, in my book, I talk about Putin being one of the major puppeteers. I talk about The Family, a group that Jeffrey Charlotte wrote 2 books on, and a Netflix series that has been recruiting. They do the National Prayer Breakfast. I talk about Opus Dei, which William Barr was on the board of directors, the NRA. I list all the different authoritarian groups. When we look at the overall picture, people are more susceptible during situational vulnerabilities, economic insecurity, divorces, breakups, moving to a new city, state, or country, traumas that happen to them. And the pandemic ramped everything up to the point where on social media, people are in these information silos, and they're being extreme. The left is becoming more polarized extreme, and the right is becoming more polarized extreme. I'm in the middle. I'm like human rights, rule of law, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. Let's come back to normalcy, people.
I was going to ask you, I love your idea about situational vulnerability, because that's how they attacked you or got you in that cafeteria, probably looking like a little sad and down, and they captured you. I want to ask you about how artificial intelligence, where you don't know if you're talking to the real person, is that their real voice? What is it? How does that, affect this paranoia or cultism? And then we could talk about Elon Musk as a maybe cult leader. But go ahead.
So I've been studying AI in detail. I should backtrack and say in 2015, the State Department counterterrorism folks were asking me, what do we do to counter ISIS recruitment online? And we actually had a meeting at the Aspen Institute. Rich Stengel was there, and Madeleine Albright, and Walter Isaacson, and Monica Bigart of Facebook, and Scott Armstrong of Google. And someone who had been hired with an AI method, computer system, was studying how ISIS was recruiting. And he said, think about STDs. And the 25 of us looked at each other. Sexually transmitted diseases? What are you talking about? He said, the more sex you have with someone who has syphilis, the more likely you are to get it. He said, that's how they're recruiting. They find somebody, they have a front group, maybe it's a matchmaking service or a travel service or something. They identify them, they find out information about them, and they systematically start swarming them online, including bots, including people pretending that they're not involved with the group, which is what the Moonies did to me. They loved they called it love bombing. They swarmed me, but in real life. Now it's being done online. And what people need to understand is that you need to become a good consumer. You need to understand how these platforms are operating. I was interviewed on Your Undivided Attention by Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin about cult programming. Why? Because what we now know is doom scrolling is like a hypnotic phenomenon. People's critical faculty, people are going on a platform and they're losing time. That's one of the criteria of being in a trance, is you have time distortion, you lose time. And the point is,
like TikTok.
Yeah, very much so. A Chinese app that, in my opinion, is
I never thought about that.
Incredibly dangerous. And
yeah. So tell us more about doom scrolling. I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, doom scrolling is the system. B.J. Fogg at the Stanford Persuasive Lab was involved with that. I believe Asa Raskin also, where you just keep getting like rats. We're getting dopamine hits to continue another time. The whole notion of likes and getting followers, even though you don't know these people, is infiltrating our natural instincts as human beings. And here's a very interesting thing to think about, that people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Zuckerberg are on and Elon Musk are on the spectrum, and they're more comfortable with screens than interacting with human beings.
Right.
And by creating that reality, they're rewiring neurotypicals like myself to be more like them.
Whoa.
And that's why so many people, especially young people, I believe, are depressed, anxious, eating disorders, suicidality, all kind of gender dysmorphia.
It's one of the reasons they want to keep working at home, because they become non-social animals or asocial animals.
And so I interviewed a social psychiatrist, Carl Marcy, who wrote a very important book called Rewired. You may want to interview him.
I will definitely.
And he talked about keeping children, at least till age 3, off of screens of any kind. Why? Because the brain is maturing and it needs interactions with humans, especially parents.
Doesn't that happen till they're 25? I mean,
the frontal lobe now is not, we used to believe it was 18 and 21. It's actually 25 or 26 for people. But the point is that early on, attachment to humans and feeling comfortable and reading emotions, reading facial cues is vital for neurotypicals. For neuroatypicals, they need to learn how to do that.
And particularly boys actually have slower development. And, maybe that's one of the reasons there's a generation of men that are struggling so much.
That could be. So go ahead with your thought.
No, I was going to say one of my mentors, Philip Zimbardo at Stanford, former APA president, has did a TED talk on what's happening to boys and his worry about boys and such. But what we're facing right now is a form of World War III, except it's information warfare. It's hacking, getting people's data, putting the data in the dark web, using AI profiling to then at scale nudge people into more extremes. We saw that for a fact with YouTube, where people were getting into QAnon and getting radicalized by the autoplay suggestion lists. And it's absolutely critical that people understand that we need to be in control of our own minds, and that if you're certain about something, you're into an ideology or a group, take a time out, turn off the computer, turn off your smartphone, listen to music, look at pictures of your childhood, chill out, and then learn about models of brainwashing and mind control, and then deliberately seek out critics and former members of whatever belief system you're into and really listen to why they are critical or why they left it, and then reflect back before you adopted this ideology. How did I come to believe this?
Go back to why the Chinese may be addicting us to TikTok. Just speaking for myself, what are they after?
Mind control.
But to do what?
They want to control the world. This is an authoritarian versus democratic, the rule of law fight. And it's not just China, but China in particular. I mean, the thing that helped me get out of the Moonies in my deprogramming after a near fatal van crash that took me away from the Moonies for 2 weeks. This is part of the thing.
Yeah, I know. You broke with it.
Was Robert Lifton's Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism about Chinese communist brainwashing techniques. And this is what they're doing. They're collecting DNA. They have over 1 million Uyghur Muslims in re-education programs to make them into Han Chinese. And they want world domination. And I say,
they're collecting the data. They know what motivates you, and then they are well positioned to spread misinformation, to destabilize the government, to make people believe that our system is broken, and eventually to create chaos. So just as they want to control their people, they want us here to be completely fragmented and at each other's throats, because it makes the American system more vulnerable.
And it's a great tool to tell their people, look at those Americans.
Look how screwed up they are.
They let people with AR-15s shoot up schools. We protect our people. Look at those stupid people. They don't make people wear masks. 1 million people died. We protect our people. Well, what's really interesting, do you remember there was a revolt about zero COVID policy in China?
Yeah.
I learned that my BITE model was translated into Chinese, and netizens in China were actually talking about brainwashing by the Chinese Communist government. It was fascinating.
What was the end of that? Did they make them wear the masks at the end?
No. What ended is they changed the zero COVID policy.
Almost overnight. She changed it like this.
Oh,
because people were fed up, and they needed food, and they were isolated, etc. But that speaks to, in my mind, the resilience of the human spirit that wants to be free. People don't like to be lied to. They don't like to be taken advantage of and exploited.
But they like to be taken care of, and that's the vulnerability. I have a question about, I think there are 4 of them. I can only think of 3. There's Andreessen, there's Elon Musk, there's Zuckerberg, and who's the 4th one? 4 oligarchs of artificial intelligence. Elon Musk, what is he with Neuralink? He's literally... And he just got FDA approval. And he was treating those monkeys in his lab so unconscionably, still got FDA approval. And he's putting something in humans' brains. What do you think he's doing? I have my own ideas, but this is your gig.
I'm very worried about it. And I don't know if either of you are Trekkies, but remember the Borg episode?
No, tell us about the Borg. Tell us.
So the Borg are people who are all connected to the central queen system, and they have Neuralinks, all of them. They don't have any individuality or free will or whatever. Anyway, I'm just mentioning that. So I'm really worried because power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Power corrupts absolutely.
What I'm worried about with malignant narcissists is that they have no empathy. And so it's about, well, I'm a better person because I have more money than you, so I should dictate the rules for everybody else and tell them what they are. I actually interviewed the world's authority on Asperger's about Elon Musk.
Who is that?
His name is Tony Atwood. He's in Australia. I highly recommend him as another guest for you.
Oh, thank you. You gave me 2 guests. So Oni Atwood is the expert on
ASD,
Asper-
autism spectrum.
even though they're saying there's no
disorder.
Asperger's,
No,
but okay.
it's a politically correct thing because the man who coined the term apparently had some Nazi alignments.
He was a Nazi, yeah.
So
Oh.
we can't use Asperger's.
So now we can't have Asperger's?
Well, but
Okay, fine.
super high functioning neuroatypicals is the correct way
People.
of saying it. Well, the point is with a narcissist, you have to frame things in terms of how it will make him look to history and to other people, and to frame things in a way that he's going to think it's in his advantage to do what he's doing. And I really think we need to protect planet Earth, and that gets into a whole other area of undue influence with the John Birchers and the Kochs and the free speech fire and all of that, saying we need to be able to allow people to be anti-Semitic or say that Trump, won the election in 2020. I say nonsense. Rule of law is clear. If there's no fire in a crowded theater, you can't call fire. That's a deception. And we need to rein in speech so that it's responsible speech. Even if it's political, it needs to be reined in by basic common sense and rules of decency.
So 4 guys that meet on an often basis, Andreessen, Thiel, Zuckerberg, and Musk. They call them the oligarchs of artificial intelligence. Are they actually, as my mother would have said, she was a negligence lawyer, highly paranoid. Are they in cahoots?
I think they are. I think that they share an ideology to bring down the government. Why? Because the government has the power to regulate all of their industries, as the Koch people and the Saudis and Putin have been doing client science denial, using my former cult, the Moonies, as a major figure in disseminating lies that they're...
What kind of denial did you say?
Climate science denial, just like the tobacco industry said. There's no evidence of cancer.
All those guys stood up and go,
but
yeah.
they knew
no.
50 years ago that humans were affecting the environment and global warming was taking place.
Well, do the soda people know that can cause cancer?
Yeah,
I mean,
the tobacco people knew, and they lied.
And what about the soda people, the Pepsi people?
Well, they've known the risk of diabetes and other endocrine issues from sugar, of course. People who are in branding always talk about, I want to build a cult brand. If you Google cult brands, you'll get thousands of links, and they'll get Harley and IKEA and
Nike.
Nike, perfect example. So how ironic and dangerous is it, or is it just sort of a benign use of the word when there were marketers spending tens of millions of dollars to create cults around their brands?
No, I was actually interviewed by a man who wrote a business book called The Culting of Brands, and he explicitly wrote this book saying, I'm interested how cults are sticky and they keep people so devoted because we need to teach corporations how to have devoted followers who will spend extra money and go to extra efforts to stay true to the brand. This is very deliberate. I mean, in a sense, it goes back to Ayn Rand and objectivism and selfishness is good and altruism is evil, and we need to sell people stuff even if it's going to kill them because we want to make more money and have more power and have more political influence.
And your 4 oligarchs are libertarians, and a lot of them are big denizens and devotees of Ayn Rand.
Exactly why I'm naming it, because it's a toxic ideology that's antithetical to survival on planet Earth. And I liken those types of people as cancer cells to the human body are, that they're selfish and they want to take over everything, even though they'll destroy the host.
Addie, what did you say it's called? What?
So I was saying that a lot of the people in Silicon Valley are self-identified libertarians,
right?
and they're denizens, followers of Ayn Rand and objectivism, because it's sort of a Nietzschean superhero role that they see for themselves as knowing what's better for society, which I think is
Right.
part of malignant narcissism, right? You know better than the poor schmucks out there.
Yeah, and it's like any other cult. They could be empowered to reality test and change their minds, but they're in a silo. They surround themselves with people who are yes people. And that's one of the problems with authoritarian cults, is that if the moment you raise an objection, you're gone. So
Right.
the threat of being canceled, and I'm against cancel culture on the left and the right, by the way.
So you know what I heard about Meta, to your
Sure.
point? That if anybody talks about the metaverse, they're told to stop because he doesn't want to promote the metaverse because he thinks he maybe made a mistake calling it Meta. They're not allowed to talk
Yes.
metaverse. Crazy.
Well, that's interesting.
Mind
But
control.
I spoke recently with another guest you should have, Nita Farahani.
We had her, actually.
We had her.
Oh,
She's
okay.
fabulous.
She's
Fabulous.
Duke law professor, and
Battle for your brain.
Yeah.
and she talked about cults at the end of that book and her concern about it. And again, for me, we think developmental psychology. Children are dependent and obedient on an authority figure. They're very black and white, all or nothing thinking, but we're supposed to mature to adulthood where we can hold different ideas, even conflicting ideas simultaneously, and maintain our core sense of self and be in our body. What mind control is doing is it's reducing people back to childlike state of functioning where they're unable to step back and hold an opposing view and understand it. And that's part of what needs to happen, is people need to realize we're in an information warfare moment with the internet, with our smartphones, and there's no data protection laws and no regulations, and bad actors want to destroy the United States of America and impose a theocracy, abolish the separation of church and state, get rid of any regulations. And is this really the future we want? I say no.
But maybe we should create a cult around America. I mean, to say the good parts that you're saying, maybe the only way to fight a cult is with a cult.
So I have my influence continuum, and my position is there are ethical cults and unethical cults.
Okay.
But I think that we need to be aspirational, because frankly, America has done some really dark things, some really
Yes.
immoral, dehumanizing. I have to mention the nuclear bombs dropped on the citizens of Japan. And
Did you see Oppenheimer? Did you see that?
I haven't seen it yet, but my mentor is Robert J. Lifton, who is one of the original people we wrote a book called Death in Life about the psychological effects on the people who survived. But the invention of nuclear bombs changed human consciousness, because Lifton talks about symbolic immortality and how so much of that is, in his opinion, a major motivation. And for the first time, people could conceive of the absolute obliteration of everything, and except for transcendence.
What is symbolic about immortality?
Symbolic immortality is part of his theory, where he says that people do things for a legacy. They have children, they create works of art, they write books in order to have an impact that goes beyond their own lifetime.
It's everything that's in Ernest Becker, The Denial of Death. It's really what that whole book is about.
So with the denial of death, people uploading their consciousnesses to machines so that they forever can rule.
Yeah, transhumanism is, in my opinion, highly dangerous idea.
Tell us why. Tell our audience why.
My understanding of emergent AI features is that they're not going to need us, and we are a vermin on planet Earth. if it continues unabated, including the technocrats who think they're going to be immune.
Is that why Elon wants to go to Mars?
Could be. But I think part of it is he wants to live forever. He wants to develop, the android body that can survive a 35,000 year, a mission or whatever. It's crazy, if I can be technical, and it's dangerous, and it's antithetical to values of honesty and love and truth and kindness and compassion and humanity. And I really want to, say we need to be grateful that we are alive, but also not be asleep, not be in denial, not tune out, but realize we're in information warfare, and we need to become inoculated, and we need to have tools for reality testing going forward.
Right. Can I just ask a quick question about our hardwiring?
Sure.
Because what I'm wondering, listening to you, Steve, is from the point of view of evolutionary biology, we had to trust other people. We had to believe that this person, maybe a cult leader a millennia ago, is going to take us out of danger. So is part of the appeal of cults deeply hardwired into us, which is why we have to fight it, to use your metaphor before?
My theory is that we're all born to parents, so we're all completely helpless, and we need authority figures to do everything for us. And healthy parenting creates safety and security and nurturance and and a feeling of self-love. And people who are malignant narcissists, the latest understanding is they have an attachment disorder in the first 2 years of their lives, where they're in a compensatory strategy, trying to get attention from strangers to make up for the hole that they didn't get from the love and attention in their earliest childhood.
It's all Fred Trump's fault.
Fred Trump was a bad actor. His mother was ill. He had a whole chapter. He was also raised in the cult of Norman Vincent Peale.
Right.
And people ask me, how could all these terrible things happen and it doesn't affect him? Back to the beginning of this interview, thought stopping. He was trained to do thought stopping as a child. Why? Because in that model, doubting yourself or having a negative thought is a sin against God, and you need to just believe wholeheartedly in your success and ignore any data or experiences that disconfirm this.
It gets back to what you said before. It's a tool, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, use it in a positive way to help us from getting into cycles of self-doubt, and then programmers use it the other way to squelch any thought that you're being part of that movement.
Right. So I made my life work studying how do you disorient someone, break them down, confuse them, hypnotize them, install or program them with a new ideology, and then create this new identity that solidifies the new ideology and suppresses your real identity. And part of that often is cutting off contact from family and friends and your past memories and recoding your memories.
Isn't that what the internet actually is doing? Isn't that what TikTok does? Or just speaking for myself, you watch I'm going to watch one section of a series, and then I'm up till 4 a.m. I have to watch the whole thing.
Yeah, I tell people turn off your phones an hour to 2 hours before you want to go to sleep. Because people need to sleep 7 to 9 hours on average. Most people are sleep deprived. It's one of the universal mind control techniques to disorient people.
Yeah, my father used to say that. They keep people up to break them down.
Yes, and I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night in the Moonies, 7 days a week for 2.5 years.
So, this is so fascinating. You have patients, Steven?
I have clients. I don't call them patients, but yes.
Do you call them clients?
Yeah.
Well, are you treating them like a shrink, or?
So I help people who were born or raised in authoritarian groups or countries, or as well as people who were recruited later in life. And many people are now coming out of the MAGA cult. They're realizing that they believe the lie.
Are
Yes,
they? You see
yes,
that?
absolutely. And I interviewed a woman who went to jail for January 6th who regrets it. And I have another interview set up with another man who is involved. That it can be undone, but there needs to be strategic messaging. And unfortunately, the current media environment is ignorant to understanding mind control, or they're not interested in teaching the public things that will actually help them to discern and understand things. It seems to be more like just, can you believe the other side is so crazy? Instead of like, let's explain social psychology. Let's talk about the fundamental attribution error, which is the universal where people are trying to understand why other people do what they do. They overestimate their disposition or their personality variables and underestimate their social context and social influence variables. So when people say Steve is in the Moonies, he must have been weak. He must have been stupid. Something wrong with his family. Except Steve was situationally vulnerable and lied to and too trusting of people. He didn't check them out independently. And so Steve got into this, but I got out, and I'm telling you, there are millions of former cult members who have left and they relish feeling free and not having to feel suffocated and suppressing their real identity. And this is a huge number of people that can be mobilized to share their story, destigmatize the fact that they were in a mind control religion or cult of some type.
So why doesn't the far left or not the far left, any left, like Biden, whatever, the Democrats, whatever, understand this and able to attract more people?
I don't understand it, but I can tell you Jamie Raskin has read my 3 books and my doctoral dissertation, and he gets it, and he's constantly talking about the cult mentality. But I said, let's have congressional hearings on QAnon and brainwashing and psyops. He said, I'll talk to my caucus.
Faith, it's easier. He's great. He's a great American. It's easier to leverage grievances, which is what a lot of the cults are doing, and which is what January 6th was about. And when Trump says, I'm fighting for you, he's infantilizing them to earlier point. But to the Democratic side, the Democrats have always had trouble developing a narrative that was as primal.
Isn't Biden so daddy-like?
I think he's been doing an extraordinary job given the state of the government that he took over.
Yeah, he has.
But I think
him.
there really is a lack of understanding understanding brainwashing and mind control and what needs to happen to help people exit. And I think that there really could be a lot done that would be helpful. And it may mean, private philanthropic foundations stepping up and providing the resources that we need to be able.
But Faith, when Biden says, categorizes them, villainizes them as the MAGA Republicans and says they're a threat to democracy and that he ran as president to save the soul of democracy, he's making it impossible to attract anyone.
I agree. The same thing with Hillary.
That's the messaging challenge.
Deplorables. Big mistake.
Deplorable. Exactly.
What should he say, Stephen?
He should say, we now understand more about neuroscience and social psychology, and that there are very wealthy entities, including state actors, that have been waging war on our citizens. And we all need to come together and learn about psychology and how to protect yourself and how to talk to relatives and friends who become radicalized in a respectful, curious, asking questions that will provoke reality testing. So I take the position with MAGA people or anyone else. It's like, tell me what you believe. You're an intelligent, educated person. Convince me.
Right.
Show me something. Go back in time. Tell me what was so influential that made you believe in Donald Trump or whatever. And I'll often ask them their first memory, and they'll often say he was an idiot or he was a misogynist. It's very interesting. They don't remember that they used to think of him that way before they got co-opted. But the point is that warm interactions of genuine caring and interest in the person and more contact with normal people that aren't in the silo. And the single most important thing is what I mentioned earlier. People have to stop being on their cell phones 8 to 10 hours a day with particular messaging being aimed at their brains, because that is interrupting our being able to be fully human and reality test and think for ourselves.
And the addictive behavior is self-reinforcing.
Yeah. So part of it is people are lonely from the pandemic. They were isolated, and people need to have real life friendships where they're getting together and not just Zooming. And realize the human mind evolutionarily, I'm told, can handle about a maximum of 150 relationships. The rest is, like, I know a lot of people around the world, but how many people do I actually know? No, it's not more than 150.
I believe that's called the Dunbar number.
Yes,
Robin
thank
Dunbar.
you. Good one, Adam.
So, Steven, this was so fascinating and fabulous. And you just, I don't know, you helped me a lot, and I'm sure Addie too, understand this thing.
Yes.
And maybe the next time we interview you, we could talk about how to really fight it, because it's bigger. Just say to people, get off your cell phones. They can't, and they won't. Get off your TikTok. Can't and won't. So what?
So I can only say to you that I'd love to do another one, and it really is going to take a lot of intelligent, caring people to say we have this future or this future, and like there's a lot of power that each of us.
I think one more segment will change the world.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you so much, Steven.
Before Faith and I go, I just want to remind you to subscribe to Jolty, follow us, listen on your podcast platform of choice, tell your friends, make your enemies like you better, and get Jolty out into the world. We thank you.
Yeah, beam us up, babies. Ciao.
Beam us up. Keep us up.